So I am going to walk us through the history of my historical career, going back to 1951, and explain a few things about it. I may have mentioned some of this stuff before, but I wanted to kind of reiterate some of that before I move on with the 68 season. As you can see, is already teed up here. And one thing I'm going to say from the outset is that even though I just started doing commentary, I'm not going to continue doing it. I mentioned this before. I don't like the sound of my own voice, and I just don't know how much it really adds to the enjoyment um, or the entertainment value. I don't think is very good with me talking. I think it's better just to let the games play out and let people draw their own conclusions in terms of what they're seeing. That doesn't mean I won't always not commentate. I probably will sometimes. Maybe for the Super Bowls or the conference title games, or in this case league title games, as they're still in '68. Maybe I will go on and do something where I'm commentating on what we're seeing. But typically, I'll just keep my mouth shut, turn the mic off, and let the game run its course, as I have been doing all the way up until just recently. Um, so anyway, I wanted to just kind of talk a little bit about um, this game, Pro Strategy Football 2026. I mentioned before, this is a game developed by Kerry Batts, who did the original Tom Landry football that goes back to the 1980s. It's a game that's evolved over the years. It's gotten better and better with every release. He's worked really, really hard on his number one focus is coaching simulation, right, and making certain that um, what's presented here is a plausible representation of what it's like to coach a football game, right? I was going to say professional football game. It could be any football game. That's the nice thing about it, is that he's got different settings, different formations that you could set up, and there's different ways to manage leagues. Whether you want to manage just one team or manage the whole team, and commissioner, or the whole league in commissioner mode, you have the ability to kind of do that. But the thing that I think that was just added recently that I really really like is this historical career mode that has the ability to allow one to look at all the historical seasons that we created and sort of play them back to back, right, one after the other, and have those teams and seasons play out, or not play out, but be set up exactly as they were in real life with the same rosters, um, and so forth, and carry it from season to season and accumulate stats. I think that's something I really really like and enjoy doing, sort of creating an alternate history, if you will, of the league. So I'm going to click on the history button here and just go to all seasons. And I showed this before, starting with '67 and going backwards. This is the game that we just played through. It was the um, Bears Raiders Super Bowl '67. Um, the Bears were certainly a surprise getting there, and then further they won big. Not too dissimilar from the way the Packers won in '67 over the Raiders. Just complete dominant performance by the Bears. So the NFL teams are now 2-0 in those Super Bowls. Dallas winning the first one in overtime. That was a much closer game than anyone would have probably expected. That game was tied at the end of regulation, and then Dan Reeves scored the winning touchdown for Dallas. You can see he's listed there as a tight end, but he was actually a running back. As of '68, I believe he's now listed as a tight end. So that, I think that updates according to what their current position is. I think, I'm not sure. I think that's the way it works. But you can see, you're probably saying, well, where are the Packers, right? Well, the Packers, underperformed in '66 and '67. I mentioned that before, but look what they did from '60 to '65. All but one season, they won it all. 3 straight years over the Giants. And just clicked a little too hard there. So they were dominant. They didn't win anything by a big score. You can see these were all relatively close games. Sort of reminds me of you know, the Belichick era Patriots or the Steelers of the '70s. They were just consistent. They won a lot. They didn't necessarily win in dominating fashion. Most of them were all close games, but they did win. And the Giants had some hard luck there. You can see from '61 to '63, A little bit of a Buffalo Bills like streak there. Sorry, Bills fans. I mean to bring up that PTSD, but anyway, that's what it reminded me of. In 1960, same matchup as in real life, but the Packers won instead of the Eagles. So that's interesting. And actually, a lot of these were thinking about, you know, championship games that sort of copied or were the same matchup, I should say, as real life. Happens here in pretty much almost every season up until 66. 65, you had the Packers beating the Browns. I believe that was the NFL title game in 65. In 64, you had the Browns beating the Colts. In this simulation, the Colts actually emerged as the winners, winning by 1 point. 63 was one that was off. The Bears in real life beat the Giants in Chicago 14-10, but here the Packers broke through and won that game. But 62, 61, 60, those are all the actual matchups that were from real life. Again, different results, but um, the same matchups. 59, you had the Giants beating the Packers. 58, this is interesting. So the NFL championship, if people recall, that was the big. People consider that the greatest game of all time. Alan Amici running it in the end zone in overtime as the Colts beat the Giants at Yankee Stadium. I believe it was Yankee Stadium. Um, and in this game, I believe it was also a game that was won in overtime by a Colts touchdown. Let's take a look at that real quick because that's something that I like to look at just in terms of just the how accurate things turn out to be. In this case, it wasn't Amici; it was Lenny Moore scoring the winning touchdown. There you go.
Touchdown!
And that game was actually in Baltimore, so that was the one big difference. It just struck me there. The Colts were in blue, so yeah, they were at home. So that was the one big difference there between you know this simulation in real life. So going back earlier than that, 57, I believe, was when the Lions, I think the Lions, or was the 49ers? I can't remember which team won in 57, but in this one, it was Cleveland over Los Angeles. 56, the Giants lost to the Lions. I think they won in 56 in real life. In 55, the Giants beat the Packers. In 54, the Giants beat the Lions. Lions had 3 straight losses from 52 to 54. Um, and then the very first one that was simulated was 1951, which was the Rams and the Browns. That game was a, a rematch of what occurred in real life. The real life matchup was, I think, a much closer ball game. I think it was 24-17 um, Rams that emerged as the winners of that game. But in this, it was 35-14 Rams. Look at a quick highlight of that game. Let's see. Let's see. We could see Crazy Legs Hirsch, Elroy Hirsch, score a touchdown here. So what's cool is you can see how it maintains the graphics and the
Touchdown!
uniforms of those previous seasons that you go back and look at. This takes up a lot of data, a lot of memory. Not memory, it's probably not the right word, but just hard drive space to maintain all that. So, if you're running either a historical career or just a regular career, you can still go back and delete those. You can delete the season highlights, and you can see it'll show you how much room on your hard drive that takes. So when you do that, on the plus side, yeah, you free up space, but on the downside, you lose any ability to go back and look at those highlights from previous seasons. So um, your mileage may vary in terms of how you want to handle that. Um, the one thing that I should mention, you're probably thinking, well, didn't you make seasons going all the way back to 1940? Yes, I did. And the reason why I wasn't able to start in 1940 is that as of yet, and hopefully this will be remedied in a future release, because I know Carrie and I have talked about it, but as of right now, there's no ability in historical career mode or in any career mode to remove teams, to reduce the size of a league. And throughout the 1940s, that did occur quite often, right? Where you had certain teams just sort of go away. One team I'm thinking of in particular, early in the 40s, was the Brooklyn Dodgers. The Brooklyn Dodgers um, went away, I believe, in 64, 65. They became the Brooklyn Tigers, and then they went away altogether. And then there was another team that came on board called the Boston Yanks. And incidentally, they um, ended up becoming the modern day Indianapolis Colts, even though the NFL doesn't recognize them as the same franchise. But that's what they evolved into. They became the New York Yanks after 1950, and then they became the Dallas Texans for 1 year in 1952. And then after 1952, they folded and moved to Baltimore and became the Baltimore Colts. In this, in my universe, I do consider them the same franchise. So the modern day Colts or the current Baltimore Colts um, do have the stats accumulated going back to 1951, which is the New York Yanks, and then the Dallas Texans. So hopefully I didn't confuse people there too much. In these columns, you can see the leading passer, rusher, and receiver for each of the seasons. You can change this for passer if you don't like looking at quarterback rating. If you'd rather base it on yards, it'll show you who the top passer is for that season in yards. You can see in 1967 it was Sonny Jurgensen. Um, you know, the one thing, I've said this before too. You know, people always kind of go after sometimes this game and say that's not accurate. There's, in real life, that wasn't the top rusher of that season, or that wasn't the top passer, or whatever. Um, this team gave up too many yards, or didn't give up enough, or whatever. The one thing about this game is it's not stat based. It's not a number cruncher. It's ratings based. At least most of the attributes are. So what you're going to get is you're going to get a plausible result. You may not get an accurate result, but you're going to more often than not get what I feel is a plausible result. So when you look at things like Dallas and the Jets in Super Bowl I, you go, wait a minute, that's way off. It was the Packers and the Chiefs. Well, the Jets were actually a pretty decent team at 66. I believe they were. I think they finished behind Buffalo, but they had a winning record. If it had been an expanded playoff system back then, like it is now, they would have been in the postseason. Dallas, as everyone remembers, where it was in the NFL championship, losing to the Packers in 66 and in 67. So it's entirely plausible that they would, in a different universe, might have won that championship game and gone on to the Super Bowl and beaten whoever the AFL team was. 67, I mentioned the Bears definitely overperformed. I think in real life they were a 500 team, but look, they were good on paper. They had some really key players on offense. Obviously, they had Gale Sayers. They had guys like Johnny Morris. Their defense was stacked. Obviously, Dick Butkus was still in his prime. Um, he started to, um, as his career went on, his knees started to go, and he wasn't as much of a factor. But in '67, he was still very much one of the top, if not the top linebacker middle linebacker in the National Football League. And he led that defense, and they were very good. So again, not implausible that the ball might bounce a certain way in some games. You got to think about penalties, turnovers, all kinds of factors that come into play that can um, be the difference between a win or a loss with some teams. So, anywho, so that explains that part of it. Let's see. Let me go back here. The teams. This gives you kind of a rundown how each team has done historically through, in this case, the '67 season. I could look at win-loss percentage. Now that'll show me also the AFL teams, which didn't start until 1960. And by the way, I've got all that. All their records are being tracked. The one thing that you noticed when you go back here, these were the NFL championships, right? And you're like, well, what happened to the AFL? The AFL teams played, right? Yeah, they did. Oh, here we go. So, for example, in '65, If you look at the standings, I got the NFL, right? And I've got the AFL. So I played the full schedule for both leagues. The difference is when I got to the playoffs, I didn't want to start the Super Bowls earlier than they were in real life. I wanted to start the Super Bowl after the 66 season. So that would be Super Bowl one, and we would maintain those numbers. I didn't want to go all the way back. I figured, I, again, applying some plausibility here to an alternate universe. I thought about, would the AFL really have started playing the NFL right away as a brand new league? Probably not, right? So it would have taken some time for them to establish themselves. If I wanted to, I could still play an AFL championship game as an exhibition game. It's just that those stats would not be maintained as part of the overall. So that's the only thing that's missing in the stats. If you look at the postseason stats, that will not include any AFL data. So there you go. So that explains that. So anyway, go back to here. The winning percentage again is for all the games every team played, every franchise. Cleveland up until now is the winningest franchise. Um, Most wins is also Cleveland, followed by Green Bay, Chicago, New York, and so on. Go over here all the way to the right. It'll give you the total number of championships that franchise has up until now, and you can see the Packers are truly they're title town, right? So they've won 5 up until this point since '51, followed by the Giants with 3, and then you got the Colts and Browns there with 2 each. So that'll continue to go in different directions as teams get better. I would imagine teams like Dallas and Pittsburgh and Miami, they'll eventually enter into this at some point as we get into the 70s and then the 80s with the 49ers and so on. So uh, pretty cool stuff. You got team versus team records. You can look at players, sort of a player's encyclopedia, if you will. Here's a record book where you can base it on. This is you can do year by year. You can do all time. I like looking at all time records. So if I want to look at who had the most completions in a season, you know, Tom Flores of all people in 1960. Now this takes into account both AFL and NFL. So take that into account. Most passing yards, though, again, Tom Flores in 1960. He was lights out in terms of number of yards he threw for. Joe Namath had the most touchdowns in a single season. That was in the one that just completed, 67. You can look at rushing. Let's see, there's rushing attempts in a single season. Let's look at yards. Most yards was Jim Brown in 1965 with almost 1,800 yards. So, that's, again, very plausible. So that's a nice little feature. Career leaders is where you can look at the total accumulation of individual stats going back to the beginning of your career. For passing yards, John Unitas leads all other quarterbacks. And by the way, you can look at other positions too. It doesn't have to be just quarterbacks. You can look at running backs, fullbacks, and then halfbacks and fullbacks combined, which is what running backs is. So that's always a good thing to look at. Rushing. See, that's rushes. Let's look at yards. Total yards. Jim Brown. He's the all-time leading rusher as of from 1951 to the present. Very plausible. Followed by Jim Taylor, John Henry Johnson, Lenny Moore, and so on. Okay, you're seeing these players here with, they shows their tight end is, their position is tight end. They're running backs, but as they get later on in their careers and they get rotated out of the starting lineup, keep in mind that in pro strategy football, there's only 4 running back slots. There's 2 fullbacks, 2 halfbacks. If somebody is 5th on the depth chart, they will not be in that depth chart. But you may have a team, particularly back in that era, who may have only carried 3 or 4 wide receivers. Well, there's 5 wide receiver slots. So if one's missing, I don't like to use fictional players. I will take, for example, a running back who doesn't make the depth chart as a running back, and I will slip them into a tight end or a wide receiver position. That way, again, at least they're on the team, and it's not that unrealistic because running backs in particular have always been receivers, and so they'll occasionally go out for a pass. Sometimes they'll get a carry. There's plays that call for a reverse pitch out to a tight end, or an end run to a wideout. So again, um, that's the reason why you're seeing a lot of that. Um, Receiving, Pete Retzlaff, I think, is number one so far in receptions and yards. Defense, I like to look at defense. Total tackles of all time, Bill George. I think he finished with the Rams, but he was most of his career, I believe, was with the Bears. You can look at sacks. Um, Doug Doug Atkins, another Chicago Bear, although I think he's currently with the Saints, or was with the Saints when he retired. He's number one with 101 sacks. They didn't track sacks back then, but in this game you can do that. Interceptions, Eric Barnes from the Browns leads all players in total interceptions all time. So, again, pretty cool stuff. Let's see, what else? Here's another nice feature I like. Under team history, I can pick a team like Dallas. I can go and look at um, under history. I can look at their individual players under the menu, and I can look at, for example, under passing. I can see who their all-time leading passers are. Right now, as you get on in your historical career, you get into the 70s and the 80s and 90s and into the current era. This is going to look really cool, because then you're going to see that side-by-side comparison statistically with guys like Don Meredith and perhaps Roger Staubach or Troy Aikman, Tony Romo, et cetera, et cetera. And you'll have that for every team. Um, Rushing, you're Don Perkins, the leading rusher for that franchise. And again, the Cowboys only go back to 60. Let's take an older franchise, like let's say Pittsburgh. So if I go to Pittsburgh's team history, and I go to players, I can look at their total for rushing. Total yards is John Henry Johnson. Um, Passing yards, Jim Finks. I don't know if that's the same. Is that the same Jim Finks who was the general manager for the Bears back in '85? Don't know. Maybe he is. I don't know. Followed by Bobby Lane. There's a lot of guys here. Ted Marchibroda. Some names from the past for sure. Um, but again, really cool stuff. You got defensive stats here. Ernie Stautner's number 2. Dodrell, I'm familiar with that name. Dale Dodrell, looks like he was from 51 to 59. So he's the all-time leader in terms of tackles for the Steelers. That'll change when we get into the 70s, right? Sacks, a gentleman by the name of Krupa. Interceptions, Keys, Brady Keys, played from 61 to the current year. He's in 68, playing for the Cardinals. So, pretty cool stuff. Again, you can, if you're a stat junkie, you can spend hours just looking at this kind of stuff. It's really neat. Anyway, so as I said before, I'm going to go ahead. I've been playing through every week, the previous seasons, 66 and 67. Each week I would do like a feature game where I would just sort of let it run. And so each play was uploaded as a video. Takes a long time to do that, and I've got very little time to spare, and I'd like to get through this so we get into the 70s, 80s. That was the time I remember. That was when I started following football. So I really want to get into that. Not that I want to discount the 68 season. I do want to play it through, and I'm going to play it through. But what I'm going to probably end up doing here is I'm going to, I think I'm going to play out each week, but I'll probably, for example, in week 1, I think there's only 3 games. The AFL gets the jump start as they did the previous season. I'm going to go ahead and I'll sim the week. I'll upload. Maybe what I'll do is maybe I will go ahead and just sim through the first half of the season. Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. I'm going to sim through the first half of the season, and then I'm just going to upload a video where I go back and I will provide commentary on that, where I'll just show, highlights of certain games, certain pivotal games that are driving um, perhaps the standings as of the middle of the season where teams are. Um, the one thing I do want to show here, you can see the Cincinnati Bengals are now introduced. They're an expansion team in '68, so they're brand new. This transactions button is pretty cool because what you can look at as you upload a new season, you can see what all the major changes are from team to team. So it'll show you where a player has switched to a different team, different position, so on and so forth. Perhaps they're no longer on the team, they've retired. But you're going to see that the Atlanta Falcons, you can see a lot of movement there with the Falcons. They've acquired Bob Berry from Minnesota. They got Cannonball Butler from the Steelers. So some big names here for them. Bob Long, they got from the Packers. Um, and there's some others here too. They got a couple players here, Jerry Shea and Paul Flatley from the Vikings. Um, so that's what's going on with the Falcons. The Colts got Timmy Brown from Philadelphia. Um, so I know he was there in '68 for the Colts. He played in Super Bowl III. So he was a big player for the Eagles, and so he's now over on the Colts. Um, they also got Gail Codell, wideout from Detroit. Tom Mitchell, and again I mentioned Timmy Brown. He shows up more than once because he's a kick returner, punt returner, and a fullback. They got Earl Morrall from New York. That's obviously that was a big one, right? Because he played a pivotal role for the Colts in a couple Super Bowls in real life, and later for the Dolphins. So he moves over from the Giants at age 34. Um, looking down further here, see, Patriots had looks like only about 3 major moves there. Let's see if there's any others that catch my eye here. Feel free to look as well. I'm going to go real slow here. See, the Bengals probably going to have the most because they're an expansion team. So I would assume there was an expansion draft, and they got all these players from the other teams. The NFL wasn't kind to expansion teams back then, although that's the AFL. They may have had a different approach, but I remember Tampa Bay and Seattle kind of got the short end of the stick in '76. Seahawks handled it earlier, better than the Buccaneers did, but it really, I think, set those franchises back. Whereas in '96, the Panthers and the Jaguars, I think, were given too much of an advantage, and those teams were almost immediately competitive. I think both were in the conference title games the very next year. So there you go. So here you go. Tommy McDonald, who was a big name wideout, came over from Atlanta, moved to Cleveland. Bill Nelson came over from Pittsburgh in '68. Let's see. The Cowboys got Mike Clark, kicker from Pittsburgh. Let's see who else. Bill Munson. Oops. Bill Munson, quarterback from the Rams, signed with Detroit. Okay, Bill Triplett from the Giants. Let's see. The Packers. They got their kicker Mike Mercer from Buffalo. There's any other ones here? Goldie Sellers joined the Chiefs. He was previously with the Broncos. Ron Smith. He's a player who was around through most of the '70s. He came over from Atlanta and landed with the Rams. He would later be on the Chargers, if I'm thinking of the same Ron Smith. Maybe I'm not. I don't know. We'll see. Milt Plum came over from Detroit and signed with the Rams. It was Pat Studstill. Let's see any others here. Wally Hilgenberg came over from Detroit and was signed by the Vikings. They also got Art Powell from Buffalo. And Paul Krause, that's a big name. Paul Krause, defensive back, was signed from the Redskins. Came over to the Vikings in '68. I think that's where he would play out the rest of his career, I think. Let's see. Saints had a lot of movement. I don't see any huge names, but some names that you associate with the teams they came from. Tony Lorick, I think he was the MVP one year in the championship. He was signed from the Colts over to the Saints. Dave Parks from San Francisco. Let's see. The Jets got Bob Talamini and also Babe Parilli from other teams in the AFL. Let's see. Eagles signed John Hewitt from Boston. So there's a player moving from one league to the other. Steelers got Dick Shiner, love that name, from from Washington. Rich Kotite, yes, he was a player. Came over from the Giants, signed with the Steelers. Let's see who else. Clifton McNeil was signed by the 49ers from Cleveland. They also got Clem Daniels from the Raiders. It's a big name. Let's see who else. The Redskins signed Walter Rock from San Francisco. They also got John Wooten from the Browns, veteran offensive lineman. Pat Fisher from the St. Louis Cardinals. That's a guy that would stick around with them for a while. Okay, and you got a two-way player here, Marlon McKeever. I don't know why he's showing from two different teams. That's probably not good. I probably should go back and look at my '67 season and see why he's showing up as a different player on two different teams, different position on two different teams. Sure, there's a reason. And these are all the rookies that were drafted. So all the new incoming players. So here you go: Claude Humphrey, Russ Washington, Fred Carr, Larry Zonka, Haven Moses. You can see who drafted them, right? Didn't necessarily all end up with the teams that they're known for being with. Case in point, Haven Moses, originally with the Bills, he ends up with the Broncos, as you all know. Greg Landry with the Lions. MacArthur Lane, drafted by the Cardinals. Let's see if there's any other big names here I can think of. Dennis Holman, I think he ends up somewhere else, but he was drafted by the Cowboys. So he's there in '68. Any others here? Cyril Pinder, I think he was a starting halfback for the Eagles, so he's signed or drafted. Let's see, John Garlington. Love these names. Major Hazelton. Amos Marsh with the Patriots. Bobby Duhan, drafted by the Giants. Dick Anderson, drafted by the Dolphins. He would go on to have a big career with Miami. Charlie Sanders, drafted by the Lions. Elvin Bethea with the Oilers. Art Shell with the Raiders, age 22. He's got a long career ahead of him. Let's see, who else we got here? Getting down to the end, I think. Charlie Smith with the Raiders. See, the Dolphins get Jim Kick. Essex Johnson is drafted by the Bengals. Looks like he was only going to be a kick returner in '68. He ends up being their feature back later on into the '70s. D.D. Lewis, drafted by the Cowboys. Gene Howard, drafted by the Saints. I think he goes on to play for New England later. George Atkinson, drafted by the Raiders. Who else? A lot of new players. Greg Berzina, drafted by the Falcons. Marlon Briscoe, picked up by the Broncos. He was a backup quarterback initially. Let's see. Rocky Blyer starts his career with the Steelers. Bob Trumpy with the Bengals. Harold Jackson with the Rams. Larry Cole with the Cowboys. And then you got all the players that were undrafted free agents. I don't know if I'll go through all these. I'll just quickly scroll down. See if there's any big names that stand out. A lot of familiar names. I don't know if I would consider them big names. There you go. All right. So that sets us up for 1968. One thing that's different from '67, you'll notice the Giants have switched divisions. They are no longer in the Century Division. They are now in the Capital Division. So they've swapped with New Orleans. So the Saints will enter their second season as a member of the Century Division alongside Cleveland, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. Central remains the same. Uh, Looks like it's basically the current modern day NFC North. You got the Coastal Division, which is funny because two of those teams are on the East Coast, um, two on the West Coast. So there you go. The AFL. Um, the only big change again is the Cincinnati Bengals are now new into the league, and they are members of the Western Division. So curious why they did that way as opposed to moving Houston to the West. Geographically speaking, that probably would have made more sense, but that's never been a factor in professional football geography, as you can see from the Coastal Division of the NFL. Broncos have a new logo. Um, so yeah, there you go. So that's it. More to come later. Thanks for watching.